Okay, great. So yes, we're here at the TechRRT Capacity Strengthening Series on Programming for the Non-breastfed Infant. It's a series of 3 different webinars, and we're starting today with one on relactation. Alex is going to tell you a bit more about the series in a moment. And the webinar is going to take the form as shown on the slides. I'm first going to give a very brief introduction to the TechRRT, so everybody is aware of what it is. And then I'm going to hand over to Alex, who, as I said, is going to give an overview of the webinar series itself. And then we're going to get into today's topic, and we're lucky enough to have Michelle Branco to present about relactation for us. We will hear more about Michelle in a moment. And we're also very fortunate to have 2 case studies, one from the Philippines, presented by Innes Fernandes, and a second from Puerto Rico, presented by Lourdes Santaballa. Forgive me if I've pronounced your second name incorrectly, Lord. And following, so the main presentation is going to be about half an hour, and then we will have 8 up to 10 minutes on either of the case studies, and leaving plenty of time for questions and discussion. So that we're very lucky to have Aunchalee Palmquist, who is going to be facilitating that for us today. Aunchalee is from the Carolina Global Breastfeeding Institute, and is another expert in this field. So as far as questions go, those of you familiar with Zoom will know that there is a chat box. So please, at any moment throughout the presentations, please put a question in there addressed to everybody. And then Aunchalee throughout the session will be, well, we've got quite a few participants, so there will no doubt be a significant amount of questions. So we won't be, it's unlikely we'll be able to address them all. So Aunchalee has the task of sifting through them and picking the questions that will be discussed by the presenters. And please do be ready to speak, because Aunchalee may ask you to ask your question verbally, and also for anyone else if they have any input during the question and answer session. And that's the Q&A part. And also we will have a webinar evaluation survey. So this is something that's really important for us to make sure that the webinars continue to be pertinent for you all. And I strongly encourage you, please, to fill that out. I am right this moment going to put it in the chat box, so you can click on the link, open it up, and then have it there ready for when the webinar finishes. That would be hugely appreciated. And there is a question in there asking you what topics and issues you think the TechRRT Capacity Strengthening webinar series should address. So if you have any ideas for future series, there is your opportunity to let us know. Okay then, let's move on. Okay, so what's the TechRRT? So many of you will be familiar with our work. The TechRRT is a rapid response mechanism that deploys advisors to support nutrition programming around the globe. And we're a consortium of 3 NGOs, the International Medical Corps, Action Against Hunger, and Save the Children. And at the moment, we have funding from 3 different donors, the US, Irish Aid, and the Swedish International Development Corporation Agency. And we work in very close collaboration with the Global Nutrition Cluster and UNICEF. Each of the deployments that we do is in specific countries is done in collaboration with them to make sure that the technical resources are well used and are targeting real need. And something that is quite new, that as the TechRRT, the GNC, and UNICEF, and many other Global Nutrition Cluster partners have been working on, is the GTAM, the Global Technical Assistance Mechanism for Nutrition. This is a much broader technical assistance mechanism, and of which the TechRRT will be an integral part. And of course, the GTAM will have a website soon, and if you want to know more, if you go onto the ENN website, there is an article about the development of the GTAM. We can make sure that this is shared in the follow-up to this webinar. Okay, so that's the TechRRT, and clearly another thing that the TechRRT invests time in is capacity strengthening webinars such as this. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Alex, who is going to tell us more about this specific webinar series. Alex.
Thank you very much, Ben. And again, it's really a privilege to participate in this major, I would say, milestone for the whole collective community working for the protection, promotion, and support of breastfeeding in any context and at all times. I think there are shared interests in emergency and non-emergencies around these issues. Just a word before sharing the overall aim and objectives. This webinar series, and thanks again for participating. It's really the result of a long, an important and in-depth analysis of the issues we are facing during emergency responses. And also it's the result, it's the fruit, it's the result of a large collaboration and a large group of specialist program managers that put together all their thoughts and the vision around these issues. So it took time. It was almost 1 year in the making, but I think it's a beautiful expression of building consensus and getting trying to get a collective agreement on how to move forward on such critical issues for, I would say, for all humanity, for all people in the world. So what was really the aim of this series? What is the aim of this series of webinars that has been prepared, and we are starting today with the first? It's really that. It's really to increase the knowledge of all the players and our understanding on what are the safer options for the management of those infants that are either mixed fed or are fully formula fed or artificially fed, but a knowledge and understanding that could improve our programming, our interventions, our programs, our responses, so that we are more systematic, more prepared, and more ready, in our emergency responses and in our preparedness plans. And to be able to reach that aim, we thought about very key, concrete, practical objectives. One is to see, so what is the guidance, what are the protocols available around these 3 main areas, and again, in relactation, wet nursing, shared nursing, and safer BMS programming. Second, we wanted to share what are the successes around what has been the success in implementing those interventions, in supporting those interventions specifically in emergency and humanitarian context. And at the same time, we really wanted to understand what are the challenges and the opportunities for us that could help us improve our infant and young child feeding in emergencies programming. And lastly, but not the least, to identify those areas that are of collective concern or common concern that we really need further investments or further attention, either through research, through documentation of implementations, to policies, programs, trainings, and so on and so forth. So this is in a nutshell what this webinar series is trying to achieve after the 3 webinars. And of course, we are more than, we do understand that 3 webinars alone will not be able to solve the problems, but certainly this provides a venue for all of us to share and to build a common agenda, and hopefully eventually to kick off or to kickstart some more concrete actions that will help us be, as I said, more prepared and more systematic and more ready to support all infants in an emergency. Next, please. And as I was telling you, this is a series that is presented across 3 main webinars. Today is the first, and it's really the result of the leadership and the wisdom of the TechRRT, and then presented that the TechRRT is the expression of international organizations, but also was spearheaded, if I may say, by Save the Children, and supported and accompanied by the IFE core group. And for, I believe many or most of you that are connected in this webinar are familiar with the core group, but basically the core group is an expression of how the collective trying to share and address issues and find solutions specifically around infant and young child feeding in emergencies. And we are extremely grateful for the support of agencies like UNICEF and the GNC and GTAM, but also others that may not be mentioned here, but I remember at the beginning, at the conceptualization, the support from UNHCR and other agencies that are very concerned with the issues. So there are 3. Please try to, I hope you will all attend also the other 2, the October 3rd and the October 10th, and please help disseminate widely these opportunities. Just again a note, and I'm sure our speakers will also emphasize on it, we artificially divided the topics. We know very well that these concerns, these actions, these interventions coexist. No? We know that some of them may coexist in the way we are solving or we are trying to support our non-breastfed or artificially fed infants during an emergency. Next. And now I would like to give a bit of time to our key speakers to introduce themselves before the actual presentation. So I would like to call on Michelle to please introduce herself. I will mute my mic.
Good morning, Alex, and everyone here. Thank you for gathering with us today. I'm really excited to hear from my co-presenters and to hear all of your questions. My name is Michelle Branco. I am speaking to you today from Toronto, Canada, where I am an IBCLC. I'm a lactation consultant, and I dedicate my time to an organization that I co-founded with my my colleague Jodine Chase called Safely Fed Canada. We focus on the development of infant feeding policy in emergencies, as well as training first responders and healthcare providers to provide care and support to families with children under the age of 2 during emergencies and disasters. I'm very excited to be here today to talk to you about a topic which I find fascinating, and I hope that you find it interesting as well. With that, I will pass over to Lourdes, who hopefully is on the line.
Lourdes? Okay, while waiting for Lourdes, maybe Innes, you can start introducing yourself. Innes?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Innes, thanks.
Okay, this is Innes Fernandes from Philippines. I'm the Executive Director of Aurgaan, also co-founder, and also co-founded the breastfeeding movement in the Philippines in 1981. And we have launched many breastfeeding rescue for survivors of many turbulent typhoons in the Philippines, where we are visited 27 typhoons every year, including earthquakes and calamities. I have also covered the Southeast Asian countries. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Lourdes, are you there?
Okay, you had just muted me. I wasn't able to unmute myself. I'm sorry. Hi, my name is Lourdes Santaballa. It's spelled wrong there. I'm almost Bella, but it's all A's. I'm an international board certified lactation consultant, and I come from the peer counselor background preparation. I'm not yet an allied health professional, although I'm studying clinical nutrition. And I am the co-founder with another colleague who's a doula and also a breastfeeding counselor of Alimentación Segura Infantil. The acronym is ASI. ASI in Spanish means this way or like that. And we've started after Hurricane Maria. I had actually coincidentally been doing infant and young child feeding in emergency work shortly before the hurricane, just because I had been recruited by some colleagues, which put me in a unique position when the hurricane came to start this organization. And coincidentally, yesterday we had a tropical depression. It had come through, and we've had 2 earthquakes 2 nights in a row in Puerto Rico.
Okay, thanks everyone. And also I would like to give a chance to the facilitator of the discussions that will follow the presentations, our beloved Aunchalee. Maybe a few words, Aunchalee, from your end. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm so thrilled to see so many participants from all over the world today. We're really happy to be with you. My name is Aunchalee Palmquist. I am an assistant professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and the Carolina Global Breastfeeding Institute. I'm also an international board certified lactation consultant, and I support the work of the IFE core group on the steering committee and just advancing our work to protect, promote, and support breastfeeding and all around the world in all situations. Thank you.
Thanks, Aunchalee. And I would say that it's really time to sit down all tightly, and let's walk through these wonderful presentations. And we will begin with Michelle. Michelle, over to you.
Thank you. Ben, do I have the ability to move my own slides, or are you going to move them for me?
Unfortunately not, so I will move them for you.
All
I
right.
will attempt to do it in a smooth fashion.
Okay. Can we get to the next slide then, please? So the objectives of the presentation this morning, so we'll spend about the first half hour just talking about what the current guidance, evidence, and recommendations are around relactation, and the case studies that we'll have after that will give you a bit of a sense of how country practices and organizational practices have been successful in supporting women to relactate for their babies. We'll also talk about identifying some of the potential challenges and opportunities that need to be considered when reviewing your relactation protocols around IYCFB specifically. At the end, we'll have an opportunity to discuss that you can see, any concerns that you have that might need additional time and attention. Thanks. So just as a matter of starting off, one of the challenges that we sometimes have in the area of relactation is a sense of babies being on one side or the other. As Alex mentioned in his introduction, when we're talking about the non-breastfed child, we are in fact talking about the child who's not breastfed at all, but we're also talking about the child who's not breastfed enough, either because of practices that are suboptimal or because of some other issue that's interfered with the parent's ability to breastfeed their child as fully as they intended or expected. So when I talk about relactation and the protocols around it, it's a spectrum of infants and children that we're talking about. So relactation goes all the way from increasing milk supply, so situations where a child is breastfeeding but may be supplemented with formula, milks, or other age inappropriate foods. A child who's breastfeeding but may be growing poorly and therefore possibly not getting quite enough breast milk, or also a child who is being breastfed who has sufficient intake but who's perceived by their parents to have insufficient intake. And this is an important point because it's a substantial issue, particularly in emergencies where other factors will interfere with a parent's ability to read their children's cues and behaviors and interpret them appropriately. Relactation is used as an umbrella term for many of these practices, but it's also specifically where we are discussing the resumption of lactation in a woman who had stopped lactating or stopped breastfeeding either recently or in the past in order to breastfeed her own child or another infant. Relactation ideally involves returning the child to the breast, but sometimes may involve only expressing milk for that child, either for their own child or for another infant. And finally, induced lactation is where no lactation has been initiated. Again, it may involve expressing milk only or bringing the baby to the breast as well. There's, thank you. So when we talk about increasing milk supply, these are two little case studies, composite case studies from various cases that I've come across. And so with a young baby, we have a 4-month-old and it's very common for mothers to report that when they were exclusively breastfeeding prior to an emergency, the displacement also disrupted their breastfeeding. Mothers may recognize that their babies are increasingly fussy, that their babies are asking to feed more often, and women also often report that they have the impression that their breasts are soft and not as full. While in some cases that's a perception, in some cases it also is in fact true. We'll talk a little bit more about perception and reality later, but when a breastfeeding assessment shows that despite good latching, despite good attachment, there are few swallows noted, we might look at approaches to increase milk supply. With a much younger baby, in the second case study, we have a mother who had a difficult birth and who was unwell, and where the baby was not with the mother as often as she might otherwise have been during the early days. And those babies often are not doing very well when we see them, in emergencies in particular. And in this case, while the mother is offering her baby the breast a few times per day, she's also giving him formula several times per day. So in that case, we might expect that there is a supply issue, particularly because the baby is not gaining well. Next slide. In relactation, where we have a cessation of the baby being at the breast, we have an older infant, Bushra and baby Asif. So this was a baby who was breastfed until he was about 5 months old, and then started being fed inappropriate complementary foods for his age. So until 6 months, we expect babies to be, oh, sorry, yes, I'm talking too quickly. I will slow down. I will, where a baby was being breastfed until about 5 months old, and then he was being offered inappropriate complementary foods because he was too young. And in this case, the baby was not breastfed at all by the time he got to 6 months. So this is a mother who has had successful breastfeeding in the recent past, and would like to sort of re-begin breastfeeding now that she recognizes that her breastfeeding ended more quickly than she expected. And this is very common. With a younger baby, a 2-month-old baby, a baby who was breastfed when he was first born for a couple of days, and then was transitioned to infant formula. This is something that happens very commonly in my part of the world, where we have quite high initiation rates, but very high mixed and non-breastfeeding rates after the first 2 weeks. As also happens when there was a displacement after an earthquake, the parents find that the supply of infant formula is limited, and preparing it takes a great deal of time to do in a safer way. So this is a mother who would like to return her baby to the breast because of the circumstances of the emergency, and realizing that they are not, it's not as easy as it was in their normal times. Next slide. And finally, induced lactation. And induced lactation might occur where a family member or a caregiver who's caring for an infant wishes to begin producing breast milk for the child. And in this case, as is common, it's a woman with her nephew who evacuated after an earthquake, and the infant's mother, their location is unknown. So in this case, there's already a shared nursing relationship at play where the baby is breastfeeding regularly, but the concern is that that relationship may not be consistent enough, or may also not be quite enough breastfeeding to sustain the baby. So this is a family member who wishes to re-begin lactation for this particular child. Okay. In terms of the timing and the talk, when we discuss lactation, relactation sort of has 3 phases. So there'll be where lactation is initiated, and during this phase, women will often report changes in their breasts, so tingling or heaviness or fullness that wasn't there previously. They may start to see, with some massage, small drops or a haze of early milk, of colostrum. In the studies that are quoted below, and this, which are also fully referenced at the end of the presentation, that lactation is initiated somewhere between 2 and 7 days, depending on the protocol, as well as the state of lactation that the woman was in, and the age of the baby, and how frequent the stimulation is. Partial lactation in these studies was noted from 3 to 28 days. So partial lactation is where the milk volume is increased, where milk can be expressed in drips. The milk will pass from the clear colostral stage to a more mature milk appearance. And full lactation has been observed at between 7 and 42 days after the protocol was initiated. And that's quite a large window, but also consider that it's quite a large window of experiences with which women approach. And those full lactations, depending on the study, the opportunity for full lactation is surprisingly high. We often have the impression that full relactation is difficult or unlikely to be achieved, but in these studies, what we see is between 60 and 90%, in some cases even higher than that, of women were able to achieve full lactation, which means producing all of the breast milk that the baby needs in order to grow well within 42 days. And many of the studies here also actually show that full lactation is achieved within about 2 weeks, as opposed to 42 days being the outside edge. So when we're considering how to approach parents who come to you for assistance with feeding their infants, some of the key things to keep in mind, particularly in emergency, are beginning with a thorough assessment. And an assessment requires first that we are able to identify those parents and those infants who are in need of support. So a rapid triage mechanism to identify those parents who are using infant formula or whose babies are not growing well, who need additional assistance. The next step is a thorough assessment, and we'll talk a bit more about what an assessment looks like, but having the counseling and clinical skills to thoroughly assess feeding is really critical in terms of creating a plan that is going to meet the family's needs and the baby's needs as well. And the plan must include more than just what we see between the baby and the breast. It has to include the family's own goals and capacity. While we have very high rates, or relatively high rates of success with relactation protocols, parental motivation is a very significant part of that. So one of the reasons I think why the relactation protocols that have been studied are so successful is that the parents who are able to sustain or maintain those protocols over a period of time are quite motivated to make them work. And the parents' capacity is also very important. So particularly in emergencies, parents may have a decreased capacity despite their increased motivation. The social and the physical context is also critical. So as we talk about the different ways that babies are fed during the process back to full lactation, it's important to remember that the social and cultural context is a big part of what will be acceptable and what will be feasible for a given family. And the physical context is also very important. We'll talk a bit more about the urgency that occurs during an emergency, but certainly the physical context and the parent's capacity to maintain a protocol in a safe way during an emergency is a significant part of what kinds of options we put on the table and what kinds of options we can support them through. And follow-up is really critical. These protocols tend to be fairly intensive and require a lot of follow-up to ensure that they're being effective in maintaining the baby's intake as well as in growing the milk supply appropriately. Maternal confidence is a critical piece because so much of the relactation process and relactation protocol relies upon the parent being ready and willing and able to follow it. We need to really focus on making sure that we provide good counseling, asking parents deep and open-ended questions that they can really tell us what it is that they need, and then providing brief and relevant information in small doses over time. And this is another reason why the consistent follow-up is important. We can't give parents all of the information that they need in a single visit. So providing that brief, relevant information over time is really quite important. Next slide. When we're looking at a breastfeeding assessment, this is really very general breastfeeding assessment advice, but it's particularly important when we're looking at relactation because these can provide either barriers or accelerators as well. So the baby's age and the baby's health status. Typically, what we see in the literature is the younger a baby is, the easier it is to get them back to the breast. Although that's not universally true, and one of the studies that's referenced below will show you, talks about getting babies back to the breast after 12 months of age. The baby's health status is also important, particularly in the emergency settings, the humanitarian contexts. We are talking about babies who may be facing pre-existing malnutrition or who may have developed malnutrition over the course of the emergency or have other health issues due to the hygiene conditions and stress of the circumstances. The mother's or caregiver's own health status is also something to keep in mind. So a mother who is well and healthy has more capacity and typically has more capacity in reserve to commit to a relactation protocol. So if she has concerns about her health or her illness or has illness, addressing those concurrently is really critical, as well as her own breastfeeding history. A mother who's breastfed other children successfully in the past, it may be easier to support her own confidence than someone who's never put a child to the breast before and who may need a lot more assistance with the mechanics and the basics of breastfeeding a child at the breast, as well as around the protocols that support relactation. And finally, can you go back? Yeah, thanks. Finally, looking at the current feeding practices. So in order to assess what's going on at the breast, we really need to observe a full feeding. It's difficult to assess where a baby is and what their intake might be, as well as to provide guidance on improving attachment and intake without really seeing what's already happening. In the context of an emergency or humanitarian context, it's also important to consider what's changed from normal. In rapid triage that we use in the field, we ask how old the baby is, how is the baby fed now, and how was the baby fed before the emergency. And part of the reason why we do that is because the change from the normal times to the emergency setting really gives you a sense of where the family is heading and where they may need additional supports. Next slide. On milk supply. So perceived versus actual milk supply is a topic of great importance in the lactation field. A belief that milk supply is insufficient is very common across all settings, and is a top reason why breastfeeding is interrupted, both in Canada and elsewhere in the world. And families who believe that their supply is inadequate may need several data points and several points of reassurance in that their supply is adequate before they begin to shift their perception. Many of the behaviors that we see in infants when there's a disruption in their normal routines are similar to those behaviors that a family might see when the milk supply is inadequate. So increased desire to breastfeed, increased clinginess, increased fussing, disruptions to sleep, and to mood. Those are all things that happen to infants and young children when their daily routines are interrupted. They're also things that happen to children when they're not being fed quite enough. So we really want to parse out for parents what is happening because of the humanitarian crisis and the disruption in their daily routines versus what's happening because the baby's not getting enough food. One of the things about perception is that eventually it does become reality when it comes to breastfeeding. When the baby is fed away from the breast, either formula or inappropriate solids, and less milk is removed from the breast, eventually the body gets the message that the breast milk isn't needed and the supply lowers. As the supply lowers, many babies will become fussier and may also start to refuse the breast. So it's one of those situations where the perception becomes the reality if we don't interrupt that cycle early enough. So just in terms of breastfeeding 101, so if you have some sense of the purpose for some of the protocols that we are discussing. So when we see increased suckling at the breast, oxytocin is released and serum prolactin increases as well. So when oxytocin is released, we have letdown, so the milk is released from the breast. The mother also feels a sense of calm and relaxation and happiness, which helps to mitigate the stresses in her immediate environment. And builds attachment and love with her baby. The increased prolactin in the serum increases the secretion of breast milk, which increases the baby's willingness to be at the breast, which leads to that cycle repeating again. Increased stimulation alone may be enough in a lot of cases, and in many of the protocols that have been applied around the world, simply getting baby to the breast or getting milk removed 8 to 12 times per day alone is enough to restart lactation and get back to full lactation. Go ahead. Some of the barriers to returning to lactation, illness in either the baby or the mother often leads to less breastfeeding, as well as worries about the quality or the suitability of the breast milk. The concerns about the quality and suitability of breast milk are nearly universal around the world, but different cultures interpret circumstances in various ways. So there are many places where a mother who is ill may be told or may feel that that her breast milk is not of a suitable quality or may be dangerous for her baby. Interestingly, though, in the research, infant illness, particularly around hospitalized infants, can be a strong motivator for relactation. And a couple of the studies that are quoted below in the references were protocols that were implemented in NICUs or inpatient malnutrition treatment centers. Pain. So pain is another significant barrier to breastfeeding, and it can be a barrier to returning to the breast as well. Very logically, when a woman experiences pain, when she offers the breast, she will offer the breast less often, and she will tolerate breastfeeding for shorter periods of time. This will lead to a decrease in milk supply and eventually to a cessation of breastfeeding. Next, please. And distress. And this is a very important one, particularly in the humanitarian and emergency context. And it's critical for a couple of reasons. One is that distress is likely to lead to more negative perceptions of the infant's behavior, and also avoidance of some of the attachment building behaviors such as breastfeeding. So when a woman or a parent is in a state of great distress, they may choose to avoid those attachment building behaviors because of other priorities, or also because of a fear of attaching fully to their child. The positive piece is that when we can reintroduce breastfeeding, we can not only introduce the nutritional and the immunological benefits of breastfeeding, but also the distress reducing mechanisms around breastfeeding. So that cuddling, that touching, those surges of oxytocin that occur in both the mother and the baby are things that can in fact reduce distress in both halves of the dyad. So in terms of maximizing, in terms of key messages for parents and their supporters, maximizing time together in skin to skin in whatever culturally appropriate way that is appropriate. This can be challenging in some emergency settings where there isn't a lot of privacy, and parents may feel uncomfortable being not fully dressed. But this is really a very critical mechanism and a very low-tech and easy way to start to encourage those hormonal changes and those hormonal shifts. It also provides the opportunity for the baby to get close to their families, or close to the breast, so that they can attach more readily. Helping parents to achieve a deep, comfortable latch, and what looks and understanding what that looks like and what it feels like, more importantly, and also helping parents to see what good long swallows look like. So helping parents to understand what swallowing looks like, what good drinking looks like, so that they can decide when it is that they're going to switch sides. Next, thanks. Sometimes when we're starting, there isn't much milk. Some babies will continue to suckle at the breast even if there really isn't any milk at all, while others will refuse really as soon as there's any disruption in the flow. For those babies who are very sensitive to flow and who are looking for a fast flow or for lots of milk at the beginning, offering the breast at the end of the feed, when the baby is mainly full, maybe when we have already fed them, but mainly by cup, can be helpful. And the small tube at the breast, sometimes called a nursing supplementer, that's used as a straw, can encourage latching by creating flow, and also supports the baby to maximize suckling while ensuring that they're getting enough food. So encouraging suckling, the drip method is one that's been used in several of the relactation protocols that are described in the resources. And this is where we use a dropper or a spoon to drop droplets of milk to the corner of the baby's mouth. It encourages suckling by giving the baby something to eat, and also while keeping the baby at the breast. This works when the amounts are relatively small, and sometimes can be used just to encourage the baby to be interested in the breast and to get them to suckle. When we're talking about larger volumes, we'll sometimes use a nursing supplementer, and here you use a thin, flexible tube in this container of supplement that's about level or a bit lower than the baby's head, and then you just slip the tube into the corner of the baby's mouth when they're latched. The tubing will vary by location. So in Canada, we use number 5 French feeding tubes, which are tubes that are usually used for nasogastric feeding purposes. Elsewhere, they use slightly different tubing, but really the idea is something that's small enough to slip neatly into the baby's mouth, as well as but without being so small that it doesn't allow good flow. Thanks, Aunchalee, that's great. So the goal is to get baby to return to the breast, suckling at the breast for all feeds beyond what we would be having for complementary foods. Where baby is not at the breast when we're beginning counseling, we need to be stimulating the breast to produce milk in other ways. Hand expression using gentle massage and a variety of techniques helps to stimulate the breast and provides milk for the baby to drink. And we use an open cup to feed wherever possible. Gentle massage techniques can get milk moving, and we can use those gentle massage techniques whether it's prior to getting the baby to the breast or prior to hand expression or pumping. When we are having baby at the breast, or when we're using a mechanical pump, we can also use compressions to maximize the milk flow. And I know we have Innes here today, and she is the queen of breast massage, so I'm looking forward to her presentation. In terms of other tools, running a little long. In some cases, we will use a manual electric pump. In emergency settings, the procurement, the training on use, and also the maintenance of hygiene makes pumps a tricky tool to use. Typically, I would only recommend using them in a clinical setting where you have the ability to both train and maintain hygiene as well. And of course, even when we're using an electric or a manual pump, we make sure that we're using massage and hand expression alongside them. Next. Foods and medicines. So almost every culture around the world, has foods and herbs that are considered to be lactogenic and to increase milk supply and improve the quality of milk. These would be something to consider locally, and I don't know if the other speakers today will refer to those, but those are certainly something that are very context specific. In terms of medications, it would seem obvious, but avoid medications that are known to suppress lactation, and with trained medical oversight, we might consider some pharmaceutical support, such as domperidone. But again, in an emergency setting, we might not be able to do that. Next slide. just feeding the baby while we're working the plan, and we'll have an opportunity to talk about these in some of the other webinars, but wherever we can use mother's own milk, even if only partly, that's what we'll use first. And then we go down the list. Over 6 months, we might also use semi-solid and solid foods to make up some of the difference between what the baby's intake needs are and what we can provide in human milk. So the basic plan, 8 to 12 times a day with frequent follow-up, and really maximizing support. And maximizing support may be parent-to-parent support groups, but also emotional support from other family members, as well as short-term supports for household tasks, so that the mother who's breastfeeding and relactating can really focus on following the protocol and getting her baby to the breast often. What do organizations need? Protocols. So we talked a little bit about triage, breastfeeding counseling, a specific protocol around increasing milk intake, and where we're using expressed human milk and breast milk substitutes. We need to know how to handle those more safely. As with all things in IYCFE, this is a cross-functional practice. So it involves WASH, it involves health services, particularly where there are health concerns or pre-existing malnutrition concerns. And we also need to make sure that we have referral pathways for support groups. Organizations need trained staff who have specific skills, and also in the safe handling, as well as in training in the safe handling of human milk and safer use of substitutes. So some of the supplies, I think that Lourdes will talk a bit about the supplies that they've used in the past, or in their practices, so I'll skip this part. And around specific IYCFE challenges. So we know that there's great urgency in getting babies back to the breast during an emergency because of the increased risks, and also because of the potential mobility of these populations. Thank you. Staff capacity. So some of the aspects of supplement reduction plans will require ongoing assessments and judgment that may not be available consistently in all settings. And certainly obtaining supplies and maintaining hygiene can be difficult in settings where sanitization is not readily available. So just in terms of the resources, Save the Children has a guideline that's quite detailed and quite handy. There's also an older guideline on relactation from 1998 that's still relevant, and that one's available in French and Spanish. And of course, the operational guidance on infant feeding in emergencies that was released in 2017 also will give program managers more guidance on IYCFE programming, including relactation. All right, so I'm running a bit over. I'm going to pop over to the next section. Yep, perfect.
Innes.
Yes, good evening and good morning to you. Good afternoon. Hello. Hello. Okay. This is our project that we have launched during or after the turbulent typhoons of Haiyan and Ketsena, or La Yolanda typhoon or the Ondoy typhoons in Metro Manila and in two islands, Samar and Leyte. And 4.1 million were affected, and many of the children, mostly below 2, were orphaned. So you see in this photo, the babies, the elder children now, this one is age 11, becomes a little mom to her brother who is only 10 months. And before the typhoon, this baby was breastfeeding. And this photo represents many babies. Many were orphans and left with grandma or fathers. So, but because my Aurgaan organization, it's a mother support group, we have prepared emergency response and preparedness as breastfeeding rescue. And majority of us are lactating moms, and our babies, their babies were left with a grandmother because their babies, the biological babies, are 3 years old. So we went on a rescue. We were 29, and we met this devastated island. And immediately, our lactating moms, part of the BEST, breastfeeding experts support team, immediately expresses breast milk to give to the baby who's really hungry and whose mother was awash by the tidal waves. And many of these are pregnant moms and moms with babies, and many were left with the fathers and grandma. So next slide, please. So these are the data we had when we went on a breastfeeding journey rescue that was in December in 2013 and 2014. But we were not allowed immediately. We were allowed to enter the devastated area after the military rescue and the medical team were allowed to do that. But we were ready anytime. We're ready 24 hours to respond. And we arrived only like 3 weeks after, almost a month, that we were allowed to rescue these 3,536 moms. And we had a rapid survey data as well as, next slide, please. Next, please. So yes, this is now the action. Before this, please. The other slide. Okay. What we did is we had cluster breastfeeding counseling for all moms with babies below 3 years old. And we found a lot of bottle feeding mothers with grandma on the photo app. And immediately we give them a breastfeeding counseling, and we show them that the baby on bottle feeding can immediately latch as long as we position well and we help guide with proper latch with another mom who is breastfeeding. So the mom saw how it happens. The most effective way is hands-on demonstration immediately. And we ask for donor's milk from this nursing and to spoon drip on the mom. But before that, we do lactation massage. Can I have the other slide, please? So I can show the lactation massage, which is our intervention. Yes. So you see, so many moms are bottle feeding, mixed feeding, they lose the confidence. And because we are lactation massage specialists, and the Aurgaan way has 11 techniques of opening the meridian lines for lactation production and flow, for the release of prolactin hormones. So immediately we do the lactation massage after the counseling, and we do the spoon dripping. Spoon dripping should not be near the mouth, but it should drip from above the breast, going slowly, dripping to the mouth of the baby. But if you put that near the mouth, the baby, the drip breast milk will flow on the nose. So it needs a little skill to show how is it properly done. But the most important is really the counseling. And we do cluster counseling with community. And we also demonstrate on grandma. So able to relactate grandma. Next slide, please. In the evacuation, back in the community, in their homes, in makeshift. So this is the grandma. So now we are 29 grandmas on duty call for, we are in emergency preparedness now. We are preparing for emergency, and part of our team, the breastfeeding expert support team, are now comprised of grandma. So from there, we do counseling, lactation massage, galactagogue meals, and follow-up support. We do them hands-on demonstration by cross-nursing with another mom. And in one day, we can do relactation immediately. We call that fast track. And the costing, maybe if we have enough funds, we can do $125 US per mom for a full relactation from whatever ages. we were able to relactate a baby at 2.5 years old, never breastfed, but because the mom was breastfeeding her newborn. And we use indigenous foods, and we source our indigenous foods to increase breast milk supply, the lactation massage, or boost the confidence, open the meridian lines for the flow and production of breast milk, and follow up visits, and encouraging the neighbors. So we have also to do breastfeeding counseling training for neighbors because they are their support, especially the family members. In addition, we have to talk to the local government leaders and also to give training to key leaders and staff of donor agencies, because we found that in the relief bags, they put donated formula milk and bottles. So it's very simple. Breast milk can be shared. Breast milk can be, breastfeeding can be taught by helping each other, putting all the breastfeeding moms and the bottle feeding babies and moms together in a mother-baby friendly tent, and we can do immediately in one day, the relactation. So we hope it could be scaled up. If video documentation will be covered where we do this breastfeeding rescue, and especially also the traditional indigenous food literacy should be practiced and should be should have a re-education. So these are what we have done in addressing breastfeeding rescue and preparedness. Now we have many mother support group in many islands whom we have been ongoing training, and they are ready. So what is important is to organize mother support group together with leaders. Thank you so much.
Lourdes. Lourdes, are you there?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. All right. I had to disconnect my headphones. All right. Hello, my name is Lourdes Santaballa. I'm an international board certified lactation consultant. I'm also an infant and young child feeding specialist. I'm speaking this morning. It's 9 o'clock in Dorado, Puerto Rico. You need to keep hitting this. Puerto Rico is in the Atlantic Ocean. The closest country is the Dominican Republic, but we are part of the United States. All right. And in September of 2017, we had 2 hurricanes. We had Hurricane Irma, which hit the southeast quadrant of the northeast quadrant of the country. And then we had Hurricane Maria. They were both Category 5 hurricanes, although apparently Maria slowed down to a 4. And then we have 3.2 million residents living on the island. Whoever's doing the slide, I need you to keep hitting because it's going to keep going down, the bullet points. All right, I think that's good. Okay, we have about 175,000 children under the age of 4. 24,388 were born in 2017, and 85% of our population is eligible for the Women, Infant and Children, or WIC program, which is a supplementary nutrition program of the federal government. Next slide. This is Hurricane Maria, which was in September 2017, actually pretty much 2 years to the date. It started on the 19th and ended on the 20th, and it is approximately 2,975 deaths. There was a Harvard study that said it was 6,400 deaths, and originally the official government estimate was 64 deaths. So you already know that the government was not very cooperative in estimating the deaths. Next slide, please. Next, next slide. This is just a picture of a family and the devastation. These are some very powerful pictures taken by Teresa Canino. Next slide, please. All right, before the disaster, these come from the breastfeeding report card, which is compiled by the Centers for Disease Control of the United States and compares all states and territories. We at birth have a high initiation rate, so exclusive at birth is 85.9%, or no, that I think that's any breastfeeding. Let me look at this. That's ever breastfeed, it's not exclusive. At 3 months, we have a 48.4% exclusive breastfeeding rate. And at 6 months, we have a 26.5% exclusive breastfeeding rate, 20.5% mixed breastfeeding rate, and 53% of children are not being breastfed at all at 6 months. And because we're a territory of the United States, we follow many of this American Academy of Pediatric recommendation is that formula should be fed until 1 year. So those babies that are not being breastfed or are being partially breastfed at 6 months, most of them are drinking formula. Okay. Next slide. This is just to show where ASI started to set up our network, but you can go through all of the, okay. So what we decided to do when the organization really started at the onset of Hurricane Maria and started as me and my colleague doing some free support groups and some clinics in a community center that opened. And then we decided to do an assessment of the whole island. We started organizing the resources within and outside of the community. So we were networking a lot with people outside of Puerto Rico. We started training people all around the island and providing services while we sought funds, choosing to be inclusive and focus on equity. We have a lot of sister organizations that really focus on capacity building of health professionals, but health professionals and many of the government agencies didn't operate at all. So as Innes said, peer support group, mother support group is very important. So we decided to build a network and train community health workers regionally. Next slide, please. So our community workshops, we would travel around the island. They were free of cost, and we would provide training on breastfeeding counseling and relactation. The only requirement for participating is that you promise to do community outreach and keep statistics on participation. So that was a very critical part at the beginning. We really believe that if you put the knowledge within each community, then I don't have to get to every community because I can't get to every community. So if we got there initially and then had regionally trained people, we would be able to do the work. Next slide. I think this keeps going down. So we have a strong social media presence, and we have support groups in 17 local groups. Either the IBCLC will be there or the community health worker, and the IBCLC can also visit someone at the home if necessary. Next slide, please. Our CASICA program is, it's an acronym for Community Safe Infant Feeding Counselor, and JUISAs are just mentored people. Here our idea is if we provide them all of the training and all of the skills and the clinical contact hours, they can eventually become either lactation specialists or international board certified lactation consultants, and therefore will have more motivation to also work in the community. Next. So that it creates the community-based expertise and marketable job skills. This is what we were up against. Everywhere it seemed like literally formula and baby cereal were falling from the sky. And I mean that literally. They were being airdropped places. Next slide. So these are the instruments that we used. Our hands, we taught people how to hand express, because literally you would go and visit somebody who the baby was not latching, who wanted to breastfeed, and you ask them, are you emptying your breast? And they would say yes at night when we turn on the generator, which I think is a problem in a semi-industrialized country. And I say semi because people think that we're an industrialized country because we're a territory of the United States, but very much we realize how low tech we really are and how 85% of our food and supplies are imported from the mainland. And for about 3 weeks, we were pretty much cut off. So anyway, we would use these curved syringes. We would use the silicone sort of, it's not a pump, it's a hand collector, but if you squeeze it a little bit, it will create a suction effect. And then the little medicine cups we use also. And then if you look, Michelle had talked about the nasogastric tube. We created these kits that include syringes to put milk in, be it expressed human milk or be it formula, and then the little syringes to clean. And clearly, we also had to learn how to do cold water sanitation because it wasn't done before. But yes, obviously, water is important. If not, we would be using the disposable cups and the drip method, because someone asked that in the questions. The next slide. All right, so here's just a real basic case study. This is a female, age 32 years old. Her infant was 2 weeks old. The baby was being combination formula and expressed human milk due to failure to thrive and low birth weight. She came to one of our support groups but didn't feel that comfortable, so she also required home visit. We taught her how to do hand expression for the time she did not have a generator on, or I'm not sure if she had a generator at all. We gave her one of the silicone milk collectors, and we found we had to train a lot of people about the safer formula milk handling. Cold water sanitation very quickly. Cold water sanitation is when you cannot boil or steam. You need potable water and you need bleach. So 1 gallon, we use gallons here, of water to 15 milliliters of chlorine bleach, the unscented regular dilution. You will soak the equipment for 2 minutes. You take it out to evaporate, and then it is ready to use, and there's no residual of chlorine bleach to in any way make the baby sick. And it will also, and obviously these have to be cleaned. All right. This mother also, the baby also needed a frenotomy. Can you go back, because I missed the, we gave her the Relactation kit, and by 2 months, she had achieved the exclusive breastfeeding until 6 months. And at this point, 2 years later, she is still breastfeeding her baby. Next slide. And I guess our challenges that we found, because of the widespread power outage and the fact that we rely a lot on technology, people thought that they couldn't sterilize or sanitize the feeding equipment, could not express the milk, could not do many things. Many of the communities were inaccessible, were completely cut off because of the trees that were down, because of the roads, especially in the mountain area. There was a lack of resource, as I said, the island effect, and the pre-existing economic crisis and lack of materials and personnel and politics led to government absence, lack of presence of the government, lack of anybody. So the next slide is the same thing, I think. Is there one more slide or no? Yeah. Also, the lack of clean water led to us becoming a bottled water culture, so that now people think if the water isn't bottled, it isn't good, which is leading to a rise in the amount of plastic in the human body. And this has been documented by the PROTECT program, which takes toxicology studies of mothers, infants, soil, and air. As I said, the formula was widely distributed, and people do not know how to prepare formula in a safer way. We kind of have re-educated the whole island in just 2 years. And a lot of people are very resistant to cup feeding. People love their bottles. So if they love their bottles, you just have to talk to them about risk reduction and how to work with the bottle and how to clean it. The next slide. Oh, and the lactation knowledge at shelters was limited. If somebody said, I think my supply is going down, they would just hand them a can of formula. Or they would, and they wouldn't give them access to the kitchen. So this is what ASI's regional output looks like right now. We have a community health worker in each region, and within those regions, then we have our volunteers, which are the caciques. So we believe these are replicable services. The communities and beneficiaries will be the service providers. We provide training in exchange for volunteer services. And very important, you don't have to be an allied health professional to provide services. Next slide really quick, because I know I'm going over as well. What we learned is that your IYCFE is only as strong as your IYCF. So if you don't have good infant and young child feeding practices in place before the emergency, it will be havoc, chaos. So prepare before the event and be prepared for any challenges, including the government resisting people not letting you into the shelters, family hesitation, and lack of money. Most of our work is volunteer. All right, and I believe I'm done. And I'm sorry I had to talk so fast.
Okay, Aunchalee, are you there?
Hello?
Hello.
I'm here. We have some wonderful questions. I wanted to ask Lourdes if you could describe for us the instructions for cold water sanitation.
Okay,
and
one more
maybe,
time. I did say cold water sanitation. Can someone, 1 gallon, is that about 2 liters, am I right? Of water, and 1 tablespoon or 15 milliliters of regular concentration cold chlorine bleach. You would take already washed feeding equipment, you would soak it in that solution for 2 minutes. You take it out, when it evaporates, then it will be sanitized the same way that it would be as if you boiled for 5 minutes or steamed for 7 minutes. It's 4 liters, thank you. I'm sorry about my Americanness or Puerto Ricanness.
that's okay, thank you. We had an email question. There is a participant in Bangladesh speaking about the Relactation program and the stabilization centers, and they've had 85% success rate with relactation for about 100 biological mothers and 2 foster mothers. This question is about induced lactation. So this might be lactation among someone who has not given birth to a baby or who doesn't have previous lactation experience. So suppose a scenario where unmarried aunt is willing to foster her nephew whose mother is no more. Can you tell me the possibility of breastfeeding in this type of situation? Michelle, maybe this will be a question for you.
Sure, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I took my headset off, so I'm not sure if my sound is as good. So there have not, to my knowledge, been studies specifically of inducing lactation in a humanitarian or emergency context. There have, however, been a number of small studies, primarily of adoptive parents and parents who thus typically will not have had any previous pregnancies or lactation experiences, who are inducing lactation for their infants. And so I'm happy to provide links to some of those studies in the resources that we provide at the end. And overall, as a sort of general comment, in the majority of those studies, what was found was that parents had a high level of satisfaction with the process, although the rates of progression to full lactation were lower than we might see in some of the relactation studies, including in emergency contexts. So that's sort of a general comment, but the principles are much the same as they are with relactation.
Thank you.
Yes.
Let's see, we had another question about the guidance to, I think it was mentioned that with relactation in resource limited settings, that cow's milk might be introduced at 6 months rather than formula. Formula in the United States is recommended through 12 months. However, in emergency situations, the guidance is different. Is anyone able to speak to that particular guidance?
Guidance. Can I answer?
Yes, please.
Regarding in emergency situation, we have to consider the water, the electricity, and the gadgets. So as much as possible, we use our resources within. We use our hands for hand expression. We use donor's breast milk from another mom, And that way, we're able to have communal contribution and help. Even with food sharing, we do that. And that works well during emergency like typhoons, earthquakes, and floods.
Great. We have one question here about I'm going to combine two questions. We have one about the importance of counseling skills. Both Michelle and Innes and Lourdes all spoke about the importance of the counseling piece in the guidance. One question was about who is able to provide counseling on the relactation protocol. Is this something that is peer counselors may be able to provide? Is it a healthcare practitioner? Is it everyone who is providing support? Some perspectives maybe from the field experience would be helpful. Any of our presenters want to
if I
address
can
that?
speak, we consider the International Board Certified Lactation Consultant to be an allied health professional, but our government does not. In any case, whether or not you see the lactation consultant as an allied health professional, we also decided that we were going to train our community health workers, and about 80% of our community health workers don't have any previous allied health professions that to be trained to be able to do relactation. If you limit this knowledge to allied health professional, you're not going to be able to get the work done. So you have to give extensive training and understand that they need to be able to reach out to a professional when their limits are reached. But it is very elitist and it is very classist to think that only the doctor can do this, or only the nurse can do this, or only the registered dietitian can do this. It's just not realistic in an emergency to limit that knowledge as long as they're very well trained and understand the limit of their scope of practice.
Thank you. So I'm going to put together one last question, and then we will invite any additional questions via email, and we'll post answers to our Q&A as well for all participants. But I wanted to ask either Innes or Lourdes or Michelle, or maybe some others who are in our participant group, about the importance of mental health support. Many of these mothers and babies are living through really difficult situations and having to deal with displacement, which is really challenging. So I would like to hear at least your perspective on how to provide that mental health support and psychosocial support in the context of this counseling for relactation.
This is Innes. It's true we have encountered many problems with trauma, and it needs part of the peer counseling training. We should include the postpartum blues, especially traumas during typhoons where they were dislocated, they lost lives, and everything lost. So it's part of our psychosocial activities with mothers and children. And it is now part of our peer counseling training. And we do that. And best effective way is creation of mother-to-mother support. And it is now it should be a continuing process now that there is no typhoon or calamities, but now is the emergency preparedness. It is true that we need a follow-through, a support for moms with special trauma in the past. And then that comes, especially in our cases, there were many like problems of the past, like rape in a tent. And when they saw the tent, and suddenly they are affected. So what is best in relation to breastfeeding? One way is the lactation massage is very comforting, and the other one is a mother-to-mother support. The cross-nursing, they shared the biological baby is given to the moms, and the other mom, because the baby is a well-versed breastfeeding baby, and her baby, if it's mixed feeding or bottle feeding, when given to a breastfeeding mom, it works well immediately.
Wonderful, thank you. Any other
Aunchalee,
yes.
may I just, let me please just give a few pieces of information. We are going to give another 10 minutes for everybody to ask questions, but for those that need to go at past on the mark, I just want to say a few things. So firstly, just another reminder, if you could please fill out the post-webinar evaluation, that would be hugely appreciated. I'm posting the link in the chat room now. And also, we will be sharing the recording of the webinar and the slides on the TechRRT website, probably after the series is over. And I should also mention that there will be a write-up of the series, an analysis of the main issues that have come up and what was presented. And secondly, we will also share the resources that have been, lots that have been shared already in the chat box, but we'll make sure that those are shared either on the website or via email. So anyone who was registered will be aware of those. And if there are still questions we haven't managed to answer in the coming 10 minutes, then we will also, with the presenters, attempt to give answers to those and share those via email or on the website as well. And lastly, I just want to say again, thank you to everybody for taking part. We've had a huge amount of participants, and also for the presenters, Michelle, Innes, Lourdes, and Aunchalee, and Alex as well, for taking their time to be with us today. And so before I hand you back to Aunchalee, who's going to give us another 10 minutes of questions, so please do stick around. We hope to see you at the same time next week on Thursday, the 3rd of October, for the next session on shared/wet nursing. And we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you very much. Aunchalee, back to you. Sorry for that.
Thank you, Ben. All right, I'm just going to go down next. We had a question. Have you experienced children above 6 months who are allergic to cow's milk protein during an emergency, and how did you deal with it? So this would be relying upon a formula or other cow's milk supplementation during relactation, or just for infant feeding, I think.
I would say, this is Lourdes. One of the things that happened with us is that people gave us formula. And so if we had a hypoallergenic formula, I mean, I know a lot about nutrition, so we could also advise the family, but many of us were eating what we had, you know? So you would try to explain, how do you read labels, if it's in the milk of the breastfeeding parent. But as far as formula, if somebody gave us X brand of formula that was hypoallergenic, and they said, oh, my baby drinks Y brand, I'm like, I have X brand. We had to explain to them that really formula is formula, and get rid of this brand loyalty, and then counsel on the diet, on what is, what would be the maternal or the parental diet to get the casein and the milk intolerance out of the parent's milk. There are a lot more foods that you can eat than not that are free of dairy or free of casein, but we need to, again, maybe the emergency mindset, get people to understand, yes, you can eat other things. And they won't be horrible foods.
Yes, Innes, please.
Can I contribute? In our experience, part of our peer counseling is hands-on cooking on indigenous foods, and we have indigenous foods, and indigenous food does not contribute allergy. So for babies we have encountered who were mixed feeding or given formula with allergies, so we try to immediately stop that formula milk, and because it's above 6 months, so we give the transitional foods out of our indigenous foods, and it comes in transitional foods from our staple diet and staple crops mixed all together, which are micronutrient rich, and we give every 2 hours in small amounts. And in between is donor's breast milk. And immediately the allergy is gone in 3 days.
Thank you, Innes. We have a question again. I'm sorry?
It's a matter of showing them hands-on how to cook and prepare and the kind of food, and teach them what this food do, and also transitional foods for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and toddlers. so integrated with early childcare and development, ECCD activities. So that is what we call Eat Right.
Thank you very much. We have another question again on the topic of hygienic environments and using supplemental nursing technologies, so tools like syringes, nasogastric tools, the requirements for cold water sanitation. The question is, are there any concerns with regard to using these supplemental nursing systems in environments where sanitation is poor? If you are having difficulty cleaning the tubing, for example. I think we talked about this a little bit in terms of relying on a not low-tech methods with the drip and spoon method. I have come across programs which would only allow the use of these tools in a stabilization center, but not at home. So what measures would you recommend are put in place to reduce any risks associated with using these tools during emergencies? And I imagine the question is related to environments that are not considered hygienic for preparing even formula, much less using this kind of equipment. So what kinds of guidance is available, and how would you integrate that into counseling if the relactation support was not being taken place in a stabilization center or a medical?
This is Lourdes, because we were working mostly in people's homes or doing group facilities as well. We weren't like the shelter. We didn't work there that much, and the shelter did have, you know, the stabilization facilities had access to many things, but didn't even give the families that. So the funny thing is to talk about the stabilization facility, like the shelter, the families were not allowed to go to the kitchen to sanitize their equipment. We had the first place we learned how to do cold water sanitation was actually in the shelters. Families who had been sanitizing the feeding equipment at home were not, they had just been given buckets, water, soap, and a brush. So anyway, with the tube, when we gave out the kit, we include 3 syringes. 2 would be for the different amounts of milk, and 1 would be to flush the tube. Okay, we talk about using very, very hot water or the cold water sanitation to shoot through the tube. And if you can't sanitize, then to use a spoon. The counseling always had to include how to hand feed, how to hand express, how to safer prepare formula if they're using formula, how to sanitize equipment, all of the methods to sanitize the equipment, and just hygiene in general were emphasized at each outreach.
Can I contribute, Innes?
Please, Innes, yes.
Yeah, we use what we had. So we use, as what Lourdes says, hand expression. We have the hands. We just clean our hands. 2, we have spoon. Even in the evacuation center, we have spoon and cup. So we use cup feeding with the donor's breast milk or the express breast milk, and we have the spoon for drip drop. So that's all. And it's most efficient and appropriate in such a situation, especially in tropical countries.
Thank you. I think some of this counseling requires that risk assessment in determining what kinds of protocols and support are appropriate, because different contexts are going to have different risks, and that's part of, I think, thinking through the programming and that will be provided. I think that is almost all of the questions that we have here. I'm going to show you who does have a question. Actually, this is more of a comment, and I'll read it because I think it's important rather than a question. The person said, I think it is important to have a deeper understanding on the reasons for a sudden drop of breast milk. Some mothers are at the point of a mental breakdown due to the kind of emergency situation they have encountered. And at this point, they need to be referred to mental health and psychosocial support in a timely manner. Cash support is another area that we need to address. It will help a lot. Most of the mothers cannot buy food for the other children, and they're forced to go out the whole day to look for cash and leave the young one at home to be fed with dry tea and porridge. So I think just a comment on how difficult it can be, not just for thinking about breastfeeding in the context of the social system and sort of the whole of the environments and the situation it does require integration of support. We have another question here. This relactation is unusual in my community. Is it possible for the child to be relactated after 4 months long and beyond, such as a case of separation or a medical condition? Say a mother has an illness or has to be treated and is separated. At what point can, it's 4 months too long, how much after that separation can relactation be started?
Can I answer from Innes?
Yes, please. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Our experience with relactation from any ages, 4 months is easy because that way the child is not discriminating. When they saw the breast, they latch, if they are breastfeeding. But if they are mixed feeding, then we advise to immediately stop formula milk feeding and bottle feeding because of nipple confusion. And so we start with the cup feeding of donor's breast milk, immediately, no formula. But of course, we help the mom. We have the breastfeeding counselor with the mom. Or we have a wet nurse that is available who can also do that. So with relactation management, we can immediately do that with the baby given to an experienced breastfeeding mother. And we also do the twin positioning with the biological child and the child that will be wet nursed for relactation. And the technique for going back to the breast is when the baby is about to sleep, and that's fast relactation in learning how to go back to the breast. So it takes about maybe for 4 months, mixed fed, easy, 2 days. But for formula fed, maybe it takes a while, but definitely a while means like within a week. And in the mom, when the mom comes back, we do lactation massage, we give the lacto-go hot meals, traditional foods, and that's easy. In a week or a few days, it's over.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Innes. So at this time, this is an excellent transition to speak a little bit about the webinar next week on shared breastfeeding, shared nursing, and milk sharing. And then I believe at this time, we're going to wrap it up. So Alex, I'll hand it over to you.
Yes, thanks, Aunchalee, and thanks, everyone. It has been really a wonderful discussions. We went a bit over the expected duration, but thanks for staying, most, if not all of you. Yeah, I think the presentations clearly provided both the technical guidance, the technical requirements, the skills needs, but most importantly, and this is the experiences we learned from Innes and Lourdes in particular, both of them shows out the context, the pre-existing conditions, the value of breastfeeding us in such contexts, in such cultures, may may facilitate or may add complication, may add consideration that agencies and responders have to certainly put in place when planning for such to support such interventions. I think one thing is sure that we can say after this discussion that across context, this is really possible as long as the skills, the capacities, the resources, the motivation, and we are able to motivate the affected populations, for example, is in place. This is just an aspect. They've been touching other aspects that will follow in the upcoming webinars. And the next one is really about shared nursing and wet nursing. Again, it's going to be an exciting discussion with some experience from the field, from the humanitarian response field. And it's basically, again, looking at putting on one hand, what are the technical requirements, the guidance, the conditions. On the other hand, how the context, the socio-cultural situations, and the breastfeeding cultures around the context may have a say, may be a key aspect, a key element that will ensure the success or less of the intervention. So again, wet nursing, shared nursing on the 3rd of October with an excellent case study and some facilitator to bring you through the discussions. Thanks everyone. Thanks TechRRT. Thanks the speakers, Michelle, Lourdes, Innes, and thanks Aunchalee for facilitating the rich exchange from the different participants of the ideas, questions, and comments. Thanks everyone. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Maybe if you look at it a little bit closely, but I think they just get like 2 or 3 small tweaks that we can get out of the way and then you can send it out. Although I don't know this person.
এখানে সমস্যা যেটা সেটা হচ্ছে নিচে যে ইয়ে করে তো ডিজাইন করে তো ডিজাইন